So we're here with Tom Lawlor, UFC fighter, Ultimate Fighter competitor, and now he's a pro wrestler. Were you always a fan of pro wrestling growing up?
Yeah, I've loved pro wrestling ever since I was a kid. As far back as I can remember, I would watch professional wrestling on ESPN in the afternoon. I'd be at my grandparents' house, where I'm talking like mid to late 80s. I would never miss an episode of WCW Saturday Night. And then obviously I also watched a lot of WWF when I was growing up. So I've been a pro wrestling fan my entire life. In 2005 and 2006, I started training and I worked the Indies in Florida for a few years before transitioning to MMA when things essentially they didn't go my way. I was a little bit impatient and took the mixed martial arts route.
So you did have a WWE tryout before you went into MMA, is that right?
Yeah, I had a week-long tryout at Deep South. One of the tryouts where they bring you in, take a bunch of bumps, do a bunch of drills. I didn't get to work in front of any of the agents or anything, so it was kind of lackluster as far as my experience went. I guess I was expecting more, and just the way that I was treated, or not even treated in a way, just kind of put by the wayside. Kind of in my head, I thought, okay, I can go to mixed martial arts and I have more control over my career there, which, as I found out, it's not necessarily the case because it's all professional wrestling.
Was it Bill DeMott in charge of that tryout in Deep South?
Bill DeMott was the trainer. It was set up through Jerry Briscoe. I had done like, extra work at a Raw. And I had spoken to him there, and he set me up there. And I'm sure there's a million guys who have the same exact story. They go there, call us back on Monday when you're back home. You don't get an answer. Keep calling, hoping for the best, and it doesn't go your way. So I was in that same boat, and I was not happy with the way that I ended my wrestling career. I kind of just, after that tryout, I kind of went away, and went and did MMA, and I was never happy with the way it ended up, so I'm glad to be back here now. Did
you have any favorites growing up?
Yeah, it's so bizarre. Everybody asks that, and of course, like the Ultimate Warrior was a huge favorite of mine when I was a kid. But now, if I go back and I watch those same matches, I'll watch Rick Rude, and I'll be a lot more impressed with him than I was the Ultimate Warrior. Or I'll watch Mr. Perfect, and be more into what they're doing. But as a kid, it was just the intensity that he brought, the excitement. I was also a big Sting fan as well, so I'm not sure if it was just the face paint that, got me into it, or if it was something that those two guys had. They were tag team partners, before starting off, so, maybe there's something that those guys had that drew me to it, clearly.
And what was your first thoughts of Ultimate Fighting when it first came onto the scene? I guess you would have probably been around 13 or 14 probably.
Yeah, I think I was 12 years old. I remember I was in 6th grade, so I was either 11 or 12 years old, and I saw UFC 2 was the first one that I saw on videotape. And essentially, I had some friends that lived down the road from me. One of them was a few years older, and he would watch the tapes and then beat up his brother and myself. So I got like a rude awakening really quickly, realized how tough I was not. But I just kept watching it. After I saw UFC 2, I stayed with it, kept watching it. I remember I ordered the UFC with Ken Shamrock versus Royce Gracie when they had a super fight, and I think that was UFC 5 or something like that. So I was 13, 14 years old and actively trying to watch these pay-per-views then. So professional wrestling and MMA have been pretty much lifelong loves.
And speaking of Shamrock, he had a controversial fight a couple years ago against Kimbo Slice.
Yeah.
A lot of people believe that could have been fixed. What's your opinion on that?
I think Ken Shamrock's just old. I think I don't know exactly what his age was in that fight, but he's had a lot of wear and tear on his body as well. It's not only just his age, but all the punishment that he's taken through the years, not only in his fights, which he got beat up in some of his fights, but also through the years training. He did years of professional wrestling before he fought in Pancrase, and then went back to professional wrestling and put even more of a beating on his body. So I think it's more the case of just he had nothing left in the tank.
And he was actually supposed to have a rematch, the rubber match against Dan Severn last year, but unfortunately, due to some issues with the commissions, that match never happened. In your opinion, who would have won that fight?
I I actually wrestled Dan Severn like 2 months ago, maybe 3 months ago, and he came in on a day's notice, and he was able to go out there for about 10 minutes and 8 to 10 minutes and do some work. So based on what I saw in there, I think I'd have to go with Dan Severn over Shamrock at this point. But.
And we recently did a shoot interview with Gary Goodridge, and I'm just wondering what your opinion of him is.
Yeah, Gary Goodridge is, he's one of the early pioneers, especially if you're talking about Canadian mixed martial arts. And he came from a time when it was like people really had no clue what was going on in the UFC. He showed up at a gym, from what I understand, kind of beat up the guys at that gym, and they had a guy who was going to be in the UFC, and they said, well, we want you to represent us instead. And he had, a phenomenal career, but his career was built around a lot of, head trauma, taking blows to the head, obviously delivering big shots himself. But he's kind of a cautionary tale for a lot of fighters now. You look at some of the guys who are, at the tail end of their careers or have, finished their careers, like Gary Goodridge, Don Fry, and you see, some definite signs of deterioration when it comes to, their thought process and their mind and their mental acumen. So it's kind of scary in a lot of ways, but Gary Goodridge is, he's one of the people who's out there trying to, promote awareness for the fighters as far as concussions and that sort of thing goes. So, more power to him. I think all the fighters in the future are probably going to owe him, a debt of gratitude.
So you were obviously an amateur wrestler. I believe you were numerous time national champion in your college division.
Yeah.
So what path did you take to get into MMA?
I guess my entire life, even when I was amateur wrestling, in the back of my mind, I wanted to do professional wrestling and mixed martial arts. It wasn't like amateur wrestling was the means to an end. It wasn't the end goal itself. So even when I would practice techniques, I was thinking, okay, this is going to be something I can use in the future if I'm in a mixed martial arts fight, or, it'll help me legitimize myself in the pro wrestling ring. So really, like, I got into amateur wrestling so I could do MMA and pro wrestling, and not the other way. Like a lot of guys look at amateur wrestling and then have nothing to do afterwards and go into professional wrestling. I was kind of the opposite.
So what would be the main differences as far as nerves go for your professional wrestling matches to your early MMA matches?
Mixed martial arts fights, to a certain degree, they're not stressful because you're in control. Like I've learned this over the years. As I get older and older, I can kind of step back and evaluate myself more. And I've learned, or I've figured out, that I'm kind of a control freak in a way. So if I go corner a fighter, or I'm just simply watching a fight and it's somebody I train with, I'm losing it in the corner. I'm freaking out. But if it's me that has to go out there, it's no big deal. I'm the one that's in control of at least 50% of what's going on, and I'm okay with that. Professional wrestling, you're in control of what you're doing, you're somewhat in control of what your opponent's doing, but you have virtually no control over the crowd, and that's really the hardest part. And that's really what you have to get. You have to make a connection with the crowd. You have to, build a storyline in their minds. And in MMA, you don't have to do that. I know if I did a good job based on a win or a loss. Professional wrestling, it's not always that cut and dry. You could have a match where you go out and win a title, but it could be an awful match and the crowd could absolutely hate it. And, in the same case, you could go out there and lose in the opening match and the crowd absolutely loves it. So mentally, it's more stressful after the fact, pro wrestling. But all the training leading up to a fight really runs you down pretty bad.
And how did you end up joining the cast of The Ultimate Fighter 8?
Luckily, in 2008, I believe, is when I won The Ultimate Fighter. At that point, mixed martial arts was very different than it is now. It's a lot more popular now. There's a lot more people trying to get actively involved. That people see money in it, so they gravitate towards it. Back then, in 2008, it was kind of still really a niche sport. It was starting to grow, and it was projected to have a lot of growth. But I essentially just sent in a video. There's a lot of people that go through tryouts. I'm smart enough to know if you go to the tryout, you don't know who you're going to get matched up with. So you could go to the tryout and end up taking on John Jones in the first round, and nobody knows who he is. He destroys you, and you never get another shot because Dana White saw you go out there and get beat up in that tryout. So luckily, I sent in a video, trying to display a little bit of personality, something different than most of the guys were doing, and the production team picked up on that and brought me in. So basically, I played to the female crowd in my intro video. So,
what was your first meeting with Dana White like?
Everybody asks about Dana White, and Dana White's pretty much kind of like a hands-off guy as far as most of the, I would say the mid to undercard fighters go, unless you are one of the top guys on the food chain, whether you're one of the champions, you're contending for a title, or you're in a big fight getting pay-per-view points. That's when you deal with Dana White. But on a day-to-day basis, or for most of the fighters who are either just in their division, or even 5 through 15 ranked in the division, a lot of those fighters just deal with the matchmakers, which now is Sean Shelby and Mick Maynard. So they're really the first point of contact.
And what was Frank Mir like as a coach and as a person?
Frank Mir is a very interesting guy. Not much of a coach. I think he would probably agree with that. He brought in his coaching staff and was kind of really hands-off, laissez-faire in a way. So he had Demian Maia there, who was phenomenal, one of the best grapplers in the world. So I thank him for bringing him in, and he also had his striking coach and some other strength and conditioning coaches come in. But he wasn't much of a coach, and he wasn't there to make bones about it. He was living at home. He was living a family life day to day. The coaches for the other team were just on vacation in Vegas. So I think it was a different situation for him. But I will say that I am absolutely 100% deathly afraid of the guy, because he is one of the most dangerous, human beings going as far as submissions. He can knock you out, but he also always has knives, guns, like a litany of weapons on him. So not somebody I would take lightly.
And you won in spectacular fashion in UFC 100 in about 55 seconds as an underdog. Was that one of the highlights of your UFC career?
Yeah, if I had to go back and pick like a definite highlight, I think the submission over CB Dalloway at UFC 100 would probably be one that I'd have to put at the top of the list, simply because of the magnitude of the event. I was lucky enough to win a bonus on that show, and that was the record up until then. So I got a $100,000 bonus on top of my pay, which was pretty measly. So it was a very memorable night for me.
And people always have the impression that UFC fighters make huge amounts of money no matter where they are on the card, but they don't understand that some of that goes to management and coaching. Can you give us some type of idea of what like a lower card fighter, I'm not saying you're a lower card fighter, but just like one of the lower card fighters could make as compared to the upper card fighters? Obviously there's probably a huge difference. Yeah,
there's a big difference, and it doesn't necessarily depend on your status or how many wins you have. Sometimes guys will get bigger contracts coming off of one big win and a few losses before that. So it's kind of a crapshoot as far as how the promotion views you. What was the question again? Sorry.
But you're not making millions, no matter where you are on the card. Like for instance, a opening match guy could get $6,000 for a fight and have to give a lot of that to his management team.
Yeah, the UFC now has, I think they've settled into a situation where their first initial contracts are $10,000 and $10,000. So it's $10,000 a show, $10,000 a win, which you can make $20,000 if you want to fight, which sounds great. You're probably going to fight maybe tops 3 times a year on a contract like that, so you could make $60,000, which if you train an entire year and you make $60,000, it starts sounding a little bit less enticing than $20,000 for one fight does. As far as management fees, usually you're looking at 10 or 20% right off the top. So if we're talking 20% of your $10,000 purse, that's $4,000 right off the bat. The UFC will fly out one corner person and yourself to an event. So God forbid you have to fight on an overseas event, you may have to purchase an extra plane ticket for $1,000, $2,000 for a corner man. If you're fighting overseas and it requires a long time period to adjust, like say people fight in Japan or Australia, you have to fly for an entire day, so you get there, your body's all out of whack. So guys will go early, but the UFC doesn't cover that. They may cover the flight transportation out there, but they don't cover the extra hotel costs, that sort of thing. So there's situations where in the past there's been fighters who are in debt before their training camp, go through a fight and win and come out on the other end still without any money. It's very similar to boxing in the fact that there's a lot of money to be made at the top, and there's just not as much at the bottom. The general public thinks that if you're on TV, you're making a lot of money, and that's just not the case.
And speaking of boxing, you've done an impression of Conor McGregor before at a weigh-in that UFC posted on their YouTube channel, has a lot of hits. What's your opinion on that upcoming fight between McGregor and Mayweather?
Mayweather has to beat him, right? Mayweather has to beat Conor McGregor, I would think. Everybody points at like Mayweather's age, I guess, is a factor, or the fact that he hasn't fought in 2 years. But when you take somebody who's been training in one discipline their whole life, and then you take somebody, despite the fact that Conor's been boxing and training boxing for like 15 years, Floyd Mayweather was brought up in boxing. His entire family is entrenched in it, and that's all he's been doing his whole life. I think if Conor makes it out of 4 or 5 rounds, it'll be a good thing for the UFC. I think people will take him more seriously. But I also think that they kind of see the writing on the wall. If you followed along with Paulie Malignaggi and Conor McGregor, they have some sort of, I don't know if they're running an angle or what they're doing, but it seems like they're setting themselves up for another boxing match in the future. So, I think Conor's smart enough to realize he's probably not going to win this fight, but he can parlay it into making even more money outside of the UFC than he can inside.
Would it be to Conor's benefit to cheat?
There's a provision, I believe, in there, like he gets in really bad trouble if he shoots or throws a leg kick. But my guess would be that he's going to try to use kind of like some of the unorthodox things, like a lot of clinching, hitting kind of like a short clinch and then hitting on the break, stuff that's not really seen in boxing, to try to get under Mayweather's skin and force him to start attacking him because he's more of a counter fighter. But I think Mayweather will win. He has to, right? I think.
And you had a big win over Patrick Cote at UFC 121. We're in Montreal right now, so I was just wanted to ask you your thoughts on that fight and your opinion of the TriStar team in general.
I've been fortunate or unfortunate enough to, I think, fight 4 Canadians in my UFC tenure and split the wins and losses 2-2. So beating Patrick Cote was a huge deal because obviously he's a guy that is well known in Montreal and does the French color commentary for the UFC. He had fought for the light heavyweight title in the past, fought for the middleweight title. Had been around forever, one of the pioneers of Canadian MMA. So getting a win over him was a huge boost to my own confidence. But at the same time, I've lost to 2 other Canadians here in Montreal, and I defeated one other Canadian in the U.S. So I guess I need to fight all the Canadian guys in the States, and then I'll win, and then I'll lose here in their home country. So.
And what do you think about GSP coming back to the UFC?
I think it's the right move for all the parties involved. I think it's the right fight. A lot of people are upset about GSP taking on Michael Bisping because he's not a true middleweight, and even if GSP wins the title, he'll probably vacate the title. But, I mean, let's be honest, this is a sports entertainment business, I mean, it is a legitimate sport, but at the same time, it's entertainment. So when you look at the amount of money that can be made, when you look at the intrigue around the fight just between GSP and Bisping, I mean, it's a no-brainer to make that fight, in my opinion.
And who would you put your money on in that one?
I'm going to say Bisping, actually. I think just the time off for GSP is going to play a factor, and Bisping's cardio is insane, through the roof. And I think coming back after such a long layoff, despite, how good a shape GSP can get into, I think there's going to be some ring rust, or there has to be. It has to be expected. So, Bisping might not be the most exciting, the flashiest fighter out there, but he's solid in every aspect. And I think that his size will stop GSP's takedowns, and his cardio will probably give him the victory.
And he's become a very good talker.
Yeah. One of the best.
Yeah. He may have a job in wrestling once his MMA career ends.
Well, he'll probably stick with his commentary gig.
That's
which
true.
All these, like Daniel Cormier, him, all these guys that are still fighting and have those gigs, like, they're set.
Now, you mentioned the entertainment aspect of UFC. Brock Lesnar has been given some opportunities in the past because of his name, and it's from what we understand, there's a good chance he might be returning to the UFC. next year, possibly. What are your thoughts on that? I believe you even challenged him at one point.
Yeah. It was actually after UFC 100. I called out all the guys who were like fighting for the titles. I guess I can look at it from a few different aspects. If I'm Brock, actually, that's the one person I kind of question the motives, because he could go and fight for the UFC and make, probably make about 10 million, but he's also making that in the WWE. And it's not as if he's in a situation, or I don't believe he is, where he needs to make a bunch of money. So being in there and knowing what I know about taking all the head trauma and taking a bunch of blows, kind of leads me to believe that maybe he's not making a mistake financially, but in the long run, health-wise, could be a mistake. But if it's just a one-off fight with John Jones, and he's doing it because it's a huge payday, obviously I'm sure he'd train and try to win. But if he's going into it looking at it from that aspect, then it's one thing. Going back into MMA and doing a bunch of training camps and trying to go for the title, I don't think Brock Lesnar's going to do that. I don't think it would benefit him at this point in his career. But I fully expect John Jones to win that fight if they end up fighting.
Right, because Brock has lost his last three. Well, I guess his last one was a no contest, but his other two were pretty devastating first round knockouts, I believe.
Yeah, it was Overeem and Cain Velasquez, I think. It might have been who beat him.
And what are your thoughts on Bobby Lashley in MMA? He's had a pretty good career so far.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that Bobby Lashley's kind of on the older end, because MMA to a large degree is a younger man's sport. Especially as time goes on and the game kind of progresses, you see younger fighters starting to really reach the top at a quicker rate. Bobby Lashley has been phenomenal. Obviously a great amateur wrestler. He has the look, he has the size, he has everything that Bellator wanted, everything that they need, to kind of push the heavyweight division. But I think just time isn't on his side, and it's unfortunate because he could have been somebody that they pushed. They could have given him a belt, and I would gladly accept him as the world champion. Look at him.
And I think on Joe Rogan's podcast, he pointed out that Lashley fights in a lot of states where there's no testing. Is that correct?
I'd have to go back and look. Yeah, there's a lot of places like Texas is notorious for having kind of a shady commission. I remember back in the day, Josh Barnett, I think it was Josh Barnett was suspended, or somebody was suspended, and maybe it was Vitor Belfort or something, and they kind of, put the fighters in Texas to kind of, skirt by the wayside, I guess. I can't remember where Lashley's fought. I don't know if he's fought on Indian reservations. I know Bellator runs a lot of shows on like Indian reservations. Sometimes their commissions aren't, the same as the state athletic commissions. So.
Because you would think that UFC may have been interested at some point.
Yeah.
With Lashley's name value, and he's not a bad fighter. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what the deal was with the UFC, if they ever made a legitimate offer, or if they kind of viewed that as, maybe they viewed Brock as the cash cow, and Lashley was just not at that level, so why put the money into him? I'm not exactly sure, but it seemed like Bellator had some real plans for him. Maybe even push him towards the heavyweight title, or Lashley and Kimbo would have drawn huge ratings. Now, unfortunately, it's not going to happen, but, Lashley's a legit star.
And Batista had an MMA fight.
Yeah.
Did you happen to catch that?
Yeah, I was there. I was live at Batista's fight. And he had an awesome manager, first of all. I don't know who the guy was, but I was pretty sure it was the jacket from Michael Jackson's Bad, the red jacket. He was wearing it everywhere. Batista, I'm going to give the guy, as much credit as he wants, because he went out there, he didn't go out and kind of in the CM Punk mold and make people believe that he was going to be, a phenomenal fighter. He went out there and he trained. He knew what he was getting into. And he went out there, stood toe-to-toe with the guy and ate a bunch of punches before he realized, well, this isn't a good idea, and shot and took the guy down. But he made no bones about it. He was doing it because it was something that he loved, that he wanted to do. He wanted to get the experience. He wasn't pulling the wool over anybody's eyes, and you have to give him a lot of respect for that. And I mean, clearly the guy he knows what he's doing. He knows how to market himself. He knows how to make money, because he's doing great. He wasn't a great MMA fighter by any means, but a lot of people aren't.
He's making more money in the movies now.
Yeah.
And you mentioned CM Punk. I got to ask you about CM Punk. all the training he had,
Yeah.
top trainers for 2 years, dedicating himself to MMA. With that performance, we knew that his chances of losing were going to be likely, but are you surprised at his overall performance?
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised by how little he showed. I guess one part of my mind, I thought that the fight would go exactly like that. He would just go out there and get dominated. But like, you know, you mentioned that he had been training with Duke Rufus. He'd been training with some of the Gracie brothers, and he had been doing that before he was even, you know, brought into the UFC. So I think there was an idea that he was already better than what people imagined. And I got a lot of people ask me questions when they were showing the countdown shows, and they would show him training, and he was doing okay, and he'd beat some guys on the show, but then people were asking me if they thought that was a work, and they just brought guys in to lose for him. You know, I think you can't expect somebody to train for 1 or 2 years and be world class at anything. It's just not going to happen. And especially somebody who's coming from a situation where they didn't have like an athletic background. You know, from what I understand, it wasn't as if Punk hadn't competed in mixed martial arts or wrestling or anything like that. He hadn't competed, you know, in soccer and basketball or anything of that. He had done professional wrestling. So to try to put somebody into a mindset where they have to now win, you know, against all costs, or that's the main goal, and they've never done that before, you know, you can't expect somebody to come out the winner in a high pressure situation like that.
Now he has, I believe, another 1 or 2 fights on his contract. Do you
Yeah.
think it's likely that those matches are going to happen?
They keep going back and forth. It seems like one week Dana White's saying, you know, they're looking for a fight for Punk, and then the next week it's that there's nothing on the horizon. I think really the big issue is that if the UFC cuts him or lets him go, that Bellator or somebody else would scoop him up and sign him. And I think that's really the biggest problem that they have with letting him go. I think he's doing some reality show or something right now as well, and he's representing the UFC on it. So I don't know if they're going to push him in that avenue or what.
Now, as someone that loves wrestling and is a wrestler too, how do you think that makes the wrestling business look? Because there are some tough people in wrestling, but here's a multiple-time world champion just getting his ass handed to him by a relative unknown.
Yeah, it's tough, especially, I mean, here in 2017, we know that they're not the same thing. Your professional wrestling acumen doesn't necessarily translate to MMA, you know, and vice versa. You could be a great MMA fighter, be an absolutely terrible wrestler. We've seen that happen as well. So they're not correlated, you know, directly in any sense. But you know, it does. I think it makes the UFC look bad, or I'm sorry, not the UFC, but it makes wrestling look bad in a way, because he was a champion over multiple promotions. He was really well known to a lot of people, and then to come in and lose like that, you know, I guess it looks bad, but I don't know that there was a huge backlash. I think the fact that he was out of wrestling for a few years kind of helped with that as well. You know, he had been not forgotten, but out of the limelight. So.
And what did you think of, at the end of the fight, the words that CM Punk said to his opponent? It seemed very bizarre.
Yeah. I'm not quite sure about getting your ass beat and then giving the guy advice, you know, right after. Seems like a way to almost put yourself over, I guess, get yourself over in the eyes of the fans. Like, you know, you're the bigger star, but he was passing the torch to him. But it really wasn't his time or place, you know, to do that. It's not a professional wrestling contest, you know. I don't know. I wasn't in there in this situation, so it's easy to cast doubt afterwards, but not my cup of tea.
And Rhonda Rousey, there's also rumors that UFC might be trying to bring her back in to try and regenerate some interest. Do you think that'd be a wise decision, or do you think she's pretty much finished now?
If you look at the response that she got at WrestleMania a few years ago in San Francisco, you'd have to think, despite the fact that she's lost a few fights, that the crowd would go crazy. And I think she'd get really big. Like, she'll get a really big initial pop, but I think it'll kind of fizzle out after a while. You know, if she would have struck when the iron was hot right after that WrestleMania angle, I mean, who knows? I mean, she may not have gone back to fighting. She might have been through the roof as a superstar right now, doing a lot of movies and stuff, but she lost that fight. Seems like a lot of the movie deals went away, and she's relatively cold right now, where even a year and a half ago she was still, you know, a hot commodity. So unfortunately, I think she's just it's going to be a situation where it's just bad timing for, I'm sure that initial match will get a lot of publicity, but after that, I don't think it's going to go anywhere.
But if she did go back to WWE as a wrestler, I mean, they were able to make fans forget about Brock Lesnar's defeats pretty easily, so you never know.
Yeah, I guess Brock Lesnar, came out, no worse for the wear, and was able to go back in and kind of re-legitimize himself. So that's they have washed away that bad taste of his defeats.
And later next year, you'll be eligible to return to the UFC. Do you think, at your age right now, you're still fairly young for pro wrestling? I mean, you could have maybe a 10-year career in wrestling, maybe 5 years in MMA. What do you think your future's going to lean towards more?
If you would have asked me a few years ago, I thought for sure I would be done by the age of 35. I would be done fighting. There's no way my body could keep up with it. Over the past 5 years, I've had a couple situations where I had a reconstructive knee surgery, so that took me out for a couple years, and really it kind of like saved my body in a way, because I wasn't in training camp for 2 years. I wasn't taking a beating like I was then. But I don't know. There's no telling. The UFC holds my contract, so to a certain extent, it's up to them. My plan right now is to go back to fighting, because I mean the money is just too ridiculous for me to pass up compared to what other options I have. So I've kind of in the back of my mind, I've accepted the fact that come next October 2018, I'll probably go back to MMA. If I could schedule a match the night before I fight, the night before I'm eligible, and then go in and fight the very next night, I would do that 100%. If I can find a situation, and there's opportunities outside of WWE, which most people think is the only place that you could be a full-time professional wrestler. There are other opportunities. There's Ring of Honor, there's GFW, there's New Japan, there's and even on the indies in Europe and other places, there's a lot of money floating around. So people can make a living. I'm just not sure that it's as stable as my future UFC career will be. And however, if I go back and I lose one fight, maybe I'm gone and I have to go right back to pro wrestling. So
right, but that's not going to happen.
Not planning on it. I've got 2 years to train for a fight, so hopefully that's long enough to win one.
Who are you training with now in MMA?
I train at a place called Syndicate Mixed Martial Arts in Vegas. We have, I want to say, 5, 6, 7 guys signed to the UFC. Right now, a lot of them are on the larger side. So myself, there's another guy, Khalil Roundtree. There's a lot of younger guys who have just made it to the UFC. Another guy, Julian Marquez, who had a big knockout that was on ESPN last week on the Dana White Tuesday night show that they have. So I coach there at the gym. I'm an assistant coach as well. But we've got a lot of really talented fighters. Roxanne Modaffari is one of the top female fighters in the world, and she's on this upcoming season of The Ultimate Fighter, fighting for the 125 world title on the show. So hopefully she makes it to the finals, or wins that belt and brings even more people to the gym.
And you mentioned you're a coach. If you could give one piece of advice to a fighter, what would that piece of advice be? Yeah,
if I could give one piece of advice to fighters, wrestlers, anything, it's you have to be patient. Everything moves so quickly, and you're thinking in your mind that you have these goals that you want to reach, or you want to be in the UFC by the time I'm 21. I want to be in the WWE by the time I'm 22, 23, and things always don't work out the way that you want them to. But perhaps they, do always work out for the best. Really, in a lot of situations, you end up exactly where you should be at the end of the day. So dealing with younger fighters, I think really the biggest thing is that they're just impatient, and I dealt with that a lot myself. So I can kind of, I can associate with that mindset.
And finally, to any fans watching this, where could they follow you on social media?
Hey, you can check me out on Twitter and Instagram at Filthy Tom Lawlor. And that's pretty much it. I kind of stay off Facebook. I try to stay hidden from the real world. So check me out on Instagram and Twitter.
Excellent. Is there any message you want to say to your fans to close this off?
Put me on the spot. I got nothing. I probably don't have any fans, so what am I going to say to them?
Sounds good. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, no problem.
I'll tell you good luck for tonight, but I'm not going to.
Damn it.